Talk about what ended up being a 4-year study from a 2-year study. Whoops, we'll go back to the beginning here. We looked at, I'll tell a little bit about the turtle. It's a moderately sized turtle. You would think that it was small based on some of the ones that we see, but there are some pretty decent sized ones that we find dead on the road. But 8 to 12 inches, nice smooth carapace, no spikes or anything like that on the carapace. Oddly enough, their plastron is hinged in one place, and not until they're a few years old are they able to completely pull themselves inside of it, but they can, at least the front end of their bodies anyway. Black head with some yellow spots. Is the only turtle in Nebraska that has that bright yellow chin, which is a great identifying feature. They're semi-aquatic. They have a tendency to move over land during the summertime. Females will move over land to find nesting sites. They do show a little bit of nest site fidelity, so they'll use the same nesting sites from year to year if they can. Males will move pretty good distances, over 10 kilometers in some instances they've moved. Long-lived turtle, like turtles normally are, about 70 plus years. Males and females have different ages at which they reach sexual maturity. Males at about 12 years old, females a little bit later, about 18 years old. They are egg layers, as are all turtles, and they have temperature-dependent sex determination. Males will hatch out of cool temperature incubations, and females will hatch out of warm temperature incubations. This is their global distribution. The park people and most of the people in the world consider this a Great Lakes species, which is understandable because that's where the majority of the distribution is. We have a bit of a disjunct distribution from the main population, as does Nova Scotia and some other places in Canada. And you can see that east of the Appalachians and east of their main distribution, their distributions are much more scant. And this map doesn't really give you an idea of how many there actually are in those states where it shows that they're full. Like these guys here, their distributions are very, very spotty and their populations are very small. In Nebraska, our distribution is inside of this little bit of a shape here, hard to see here. And again, ours is not continuous. And the goal of this study was to determine just how continuous the population was. So first thing I did before we started doing this was look at what we knew about them already in terms of distribution. And these are records from museum specimens, and these are records from the Heritage Database. And you can see some of them are new. I was going to put a map up that separated the ones pre and post 1980, but just for the sake of speed, I just left this one in here. But you can see where they're distributed along the Elkhorn, and then a little bit along the Platte, and a little, well, not so much along the loops, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The conservation status, they are considered endangered by the IUCN. They are an Appendix 2 species via CITES. NatureServe lists them as a G4 and 4S4 species. Fish and Wildlife Service has no status for them. However, that is under review, which was the reason for this study in the first place. And Nebraska lists them as a Tier 1 at-risk species. Notice in this map that Nebraska is the only population that is considered to be apparently secure. About 10 years ago, this map had Nebraska as a secure population, and again, the only secure population. The rest of these areas, they're in dire straits. South Dakota has not seen a Blanding's turtle in over 50 years. Missouri has maybe 3 sites where you can find them. Well, that's it for now. We can talk more about that if we have questions later. So what are the threats across the state? Well, habitat loss and fragmentation is the threat for everything that's declining in numbers. Road mortality is a very real threat for not just for Blanding's turtles, but for other turtles. And probably one of the bigger threats is nest predation, something that people forget about. Raccoons and skunks and other kinds of digging mammals that can reach the nests will dig them up and eat every single egg in their nest. And you can see in this image right here, there are some egg shells that were left over. These are just a few. This entire area must have had well over 400 or 500 eggshells that were left all over here. Every nest that was in this area was dug up and eaten. Sorry about the gross turtle pictures, but reality, we found quite a few. So the project background: in 2015, Fish and Wildlife Service had launched an assessment to consider some species for listing as threatened and endangered. The original list was 53, and I think they whittled it down to 20. Blanding's turtles were on that list. In 2017, Mike Fritz, to get ready for what would eventually be a request for data by the Fish and Wildlife Service, decided to launch a survey to see where these turtles exist outside their range, outside their core range in the sandhills. A huge study was done at the Valentine Wildlife Refuge, and the numbers that were estimated to be at that refuge were somewhere between 45 and 50,000 individuals, and that's just at the refuge. So in their core portion of their range, they're doing okay. But he wanted to know specifically along the Elkhorn, Loop, and Platte River systems where these turtles exist. So in 2018, the surveys began. As with all game and parks activities, they began in July, which is difficult for a field season to begin in. And so a 2-year survey morphed into a 4-year survey for a couple of reasons. One, because 2018 was a very short season. Second, 2019 was a very crappy season. And I'll show you why in case you forgot later on. And then also some additional funding was stolen from another project. Thank you, Sean. I'm not sure where that came from, and I don't care so long as it was there. We wrapped up the final season, 2021, just this past weekend, where I did a few more places that I had wanted to get to but hadn't had the chance to get to. And again, their threatened and endangered listing status is still under review by Fish and Wildlife Service. So how do we do these surveys? Well, we started off with hoop traps. We set hoop traps in as many wetlands as we could get to. Hoop traps are great for places where you can have access to, so public properties, not private properties. You get chased out of the land if you get caught setting traps on private properties, I found out. We would walk shorelines and try to see if anything was just basking or emerging from hibernation on the shorelines. We would not specifically look for turtles on roads in specific places, but as we traveled between study sites or survey sites, we would look for it. It would stop for every dead turtle on the road, which in some cases was a lot. And then predominantly we use visual surveys. So here's an example of one of the hoop traps that we had set up. This is an example of how we use the visual surveys with spotting scopes. This is the survey area. So this gray area right here is where the core portion of the range is approximately. This is what Mike wanted surveyed in 2 years. So I'm kind of glad it went to a 4-year study, 4-year survey. All right. You remember 2019? If you look at this and you look at the Department of Roads map from 2019, from spring of 2019, every road, every bridge, every town, every place where I needed to go survey was unavailable. And some of these places were unavailable for most of the spring. Some of them were unavailable for over a year. So the next year, we were able to go back to some of these places or to some of these places that we weren't able to. So 2020 was the year we spent most of our time out surveying. We surveyed 327 sites. It's probably a little more than that. There's some places that I'd stop and I'd look around, and if I didn't see a turtle, I just kept going. I didn't really record the location, but all of these little red dots represent places that we conducted surveys. So hoop traps. Not a single Blanding's turtle entered a hoop trap, not surprised. We got snapping turtles, we got painted turtles, lots of painted turtles. We got spiny soft shells. We even got a smallmouth bass and a couple of catfish, but no Blanding's turtles. Shorelines. In the main portion of their range where they actually occupy those small wetlands, shoreline surveying is very productive, but not for us. I will say that Memphis Lake wins awards for having the most Blanding's turtles encountered on the shore. We found 11 in one day. The most curious Blanding's turtles, because they would poke their heads up and want to know what we were doing. And the grossest Blanding's turtles. You can see this one here with his head just about to rest on a dead fish, and the grossest painted turtles as well. This one was not the only one basking on a dead carp. There were lots of turtles basking on dead carps for lack of anything else to bask on. Casual road encounters. As we drove between sites, 4 were found dead on the road. 1 was alive on the road, and 1 was alive on the road but injured by a vehicle, and this was the one injured by a vehicle. Was actually able to put these puzzle pieces back together with a little bit of epoxy and super glue, and this turtle is doing quite fine right now. All right, so most of our results were from binocular and spotting scope surveys. We identified more than 100 Blanding's turtles. I can't really give you an exact number because sometimes they would pop their heads up and pull them back down, and we'd get an estimate of how many we saw. And for the most part, we would see them breaching, right, which was not an easy way to find them. You can see this little head right here, or we would see them basking. And on this muskrat lodge, or looks like a muskrat lodge, you can see the painted turtle sitting up here all proud because he's the king of the hill. But down here, what you didn't see a whole lot of is a shell, but there's the little yellow chin of the Blanding's turtle that was sitting in front of this thing. I watched this painted turtle for a good 4 or 5 minutes before I realized there was a damn Blanding's turtle walking around the base of it. So, results: 100 plus observations, 59 different locations. This marks the locations where we found actual Blanding's turtles. Some of them were historic sites where we had gone back to make sure that they still existed. Some of them were novel sites, very novel sites, very new sites. So if you compare the museum and element occurrence records with the results from the study, you can see that there are a few places where we filled in some gaps and extended their ranges down some of these river systems and along in the eastern part of their range. So anything over here that's yellow is a new location for turtles. And then look at these guys. So let's talk about these outliers. The Shadron Blanding's turtle was actually captured by Matt Steffel. I know you're out there, Matt. Found it in front of his house, and he sent me photographic vouchers, which we deposited at the Sternberg Museum. And I thought, well, when you usually find a turtle roaming around in the city, it's probably somebody's released pet. But then again, there were others that were found, and I'll talk about those in a second. The one that was in Dundee County, this specimen right here, has been in the system since 1945, collected by someone named W. Keener. He also collected plants and lichens from Nebraska around the same time. Right now, that specimen is at the Bernice Hawaii Bishop Museum in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I don't know that we need to verify that it's actually a Blanding's turtle, so somebody needs to cough up some money. Also, given its proximity to Colorado and to Kansas, who would all be interested to find out if they had Blanding's turtle populations this close to their states, maybe they, with a collaborative effort, could send a team to Hawaii to look at the one turtle specimen, which is probably misidentified. But anyway, more support for Matt's panhandle observation. So in 2016, Jerry Schumacher found a turtle not too far from Matt's house, another Shadron specimen. And then in 2017, John Sottle found and reported of a Blanding's turtle from Fort Robinson State Park. I don't understand why they're here. We'll talk a little bit about that later on when we talk about the implications of this study. Well, we'll talk about it right now. So, what did we do? What did we get out of this? Well, we revisited some historic sites and found out that they're still in place in some places. We visited a lot of other historic sites and found out that the places where they were found probably don't even exist anymore. Especially around Lincoln, there's some specimens that were collected around Valparaiso and other places around Lincoln that I no clue where they would have come from. At least 30 new locations we marked on the map. We can say now that there's a more or less continuous distribution along the Niobrara River between Valentine and Niobrara. We did not verify that they're in Kippahaw County, but they're in Boyd and they're in Cherry. There's no reason that they should not be in Kippahaw. They're also in Knox County along the river. They're more or less continuous along the Elkhorn, all the way to the Platte River, and throughout the north and middle loops, and then into the loop where the loop confluences into the Platte. They are conspicuously absent along the Platte River between North Platte and where it confluences with the loop. I don't know how many exact wetlands I've checked out there, but I checked a lot and I checked them many times. In places where there should be, like if I were a Blanding's turtle, I'd pack my family out and move in, but they're not there. Much more abundant at Memphis Lake than we previously understood. I always heard stories about them being there, and I had been going out there for more than 20 years to look for them. And I'd never seen one, never found one. And then all of a sudden, one day we found 11. So just a matter of understanding when and where to look. There's a possibility that their range is expanding. Not sure why they're showing up in the Panhandle. I would expect them to be along the Niobrara, but they're quite a distance from the Niobrara. So perhaps they're released pets or animals that were picked up on people's drive to the Panhandle and were released at the nearest pond that they could see, or not sure. But it's not unlikely that they could expand to the west. They're a lot more tolerant of the changes in climate that we are experiencing and will continue to experience. It's expected that their numbers will increase and that their distribution will expand as a result of climate change. So in case I had a little time, I talked about this survey efficiency, why we decided to go with visual surveys as opposed to other surveys. Hoop traps, besides the fact that they're time and labor intensive, you have to have access to properties. And so public properties are great, private properties, not so much. Casual road encounters are called casual for a reason. It's a very inefficient form of surveying for turtles. So in order to cover the most amount of space in the fastest amount of time, we decided to go with the visual encounter or the visual surveys using scopes and binoculars. Advantages, you can cover a lot of places. You're not restricted to public properties. I will say that we have been approached by private landowners wondering what the hell we were doing, looking at their property with binoculars. I believe Brett Anderson was with us one day when that happened. But the other good thing is that once we identify a Blanding's turtle is there, there's really no reason to go back because we're just simply doing a presence absence. And if they're present, then we just mark it on the map, at least for this study anyway. Disadvantages, basking turtles spook pretty easily. I learned very early that wearing a red shirt, not the best way to go out and turtle survey. I don't have a lot of red shirts anyway for a lot of reasons, but I don't wear them anymore in the field. Positive identification can be challenging, and getting the search image to determine whether it's a Blanding's turtle versus another turtle, it requires a little bit of practice. So I've gotten very good at turtle head identification. Yeah. Looking through the binoculars, this is normally what you see with a breaching turtle. You see a painted turtle, a snapping turtle, and a Blanding's turtle. And that bright yellow chin is very easily identifiable, but sometimes you're not this close. You're a little bit further away. And so you see this. Well, this is one of the sites that I went to. On this day, there were well over 100 turtles breaching in this wetland right here. Right? Can you spot the Blanding's turtle? Oh, nope. There it is. Yay. Yeah, I know. With this, I took this image on purpose to show you what a lot of turtle head looks like when you're looking out at a wetland, but with a different camera and in a little bit more up close image. You can see that the Blanding's turtle has that wide head, that yellow chin, and a great big, I love you guys, smile. Whereas the painted turtle has a narrow head. You can see the yellow stripes barely along the side of the road, and it's got that smug smirk like, what are you doing? I need to get out of here and stop staring at me. All right. Lots of people to acknowledge. Mike Fritz, who initially provided the opportunity to do this. Sean Dunn, who took over and also got some additional funding for a couple of more years. Colleen, for giving me all the heritage database records that I needed. Oops. Oops. Melissa, who was my handler during the Mike Sean void for a little while when there was nobody there. Teresa Lombard and Brett for being money handlers. Sean also, but Sean kind of moved into a better, more a closer position to being out with us in the field and stuff. Field assistants from Stephanie Morrow, Christopher Visser, and then a lot of people reported observations that we were able to mark on the map. I will say that if you happen to come across blanding turtles and you're like, I'm going to fill out an EO and submit it, try to get a photograph. In this day and age, many museums are actually accepting photographs as voucher specimens. And if you send me a photograph with all the information where it came from, I can go ahead and get that deposited. And then we can actually voucher them as locations wherever we happen to find them. All right. That went a little bit over. Sorry.
Not too bad.